On its 50th anniversary, the Department of Science and Technology called him an education icon for doing trailblazing work in education administration, and in education reform. He continues that work today as a member of the Advisory Council of Edcom 2. Good evening. I'm John Nery, and tonight, Father Ben Nebres, SJ, will be with us in the public square. I can literally spend the next half hour just reading the CV of Father Ben Nebres out loud. Perhaps I can mention some of his many achievements or positions of responsibility in my questions, but for now, let me just say that Father Ben served as Provincial Superior of the Jesuits in the Philippines during a most critical period, has received several honorary doctorates to add to his own PhD in mathematics from Stanford University, was named a national scientist in 2011, one of only about 40, and his latest honor, received the Pro Deo et Patria for God and Country Award from the Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines only the other month. Good evening, Father Ben. Thank you for joining us in the public square. Good evening, Father Ben.
Good evening. Good evening, sorry.
Father Ben, let me start by asking you, you were president of Xavier University, Ateneo de Cagayan for 3 years, and then president of Ateneo de Manila University for 18. In your experience, what makes for an effective education administrator?
We always talk, of course, you do need some background. You do need to understand the education landscape. So some experience there is quite important. I always say that you have to know your institution also. I always spent a lot of time, like when I went to Xavier University, I really spent a lot of time meeting with all the faculty, the staff, in the small groups, or get to know them, understand. I would read all the files. In other words, you have to know the institution, and to know an institution, you have to know the history a little, and key people. And then you have to know the environment around, understand the context in which they're operating. And then, of course, understand some management. Read books like Peter Drucker, Heifetz, and so on. But at the end of the day, also you really have to engage and care for each other. It's a combination of head and heart. You have to know the people, care for them, and you have to be willing to solve problems. Like in almost all the cases I really had to engage problems and engage the community so we could solve them. I think one of the weaknesses of many leaders is that they're too much on the top. They really don't spend time on the ground to get to know individuals, to get to know individual contexts. Because problems are always contextual, and challenges are always contextual, and you have to work within the context.
Father Ben, do you spend a lot of time also crafting a vision, a sense of mission for the educational institution, whether it's Xavier University or Ateneo de Manila? And do you do this after you've consulted most everyone?
I'm sorry, do I?
Do you spend a lot of time crafting a vision for the university?
Well, what is important for me is that you have to know essentially what the institution is, and you have to have some idea where you want to go in the next so many years. No? Like when I went to Xavier University, I said, okay, the key problems they faced was financial, and as well as personnel. So, in other words, capability. So I really focus on building capability. I work to resolve the financial problems, and I work to do faculty development. So it depends a bit on the stage in which you are in, no? Because you may have a nice vision, but do you have any capability to reach that? No? And capability does come from the quality of your people, and of course, you need financial resources. But at the end of the day, the directions for a university are fairly clear. You want to have a level of excellence, for faculty and for your students.
Mhm.
And in very practical terms, you want to be able to see that your students will be successful later on. And again, that is dependent on the environment. But you do have to look at capability, and I've always tried to focus on the capability of the system, the quality of the people, and the quality of your resources. Very often, people have very big visions, but you don't have the capability to get there. No?
Yes.
Vision, put it this way, vision is great, but the question is, can you actually get there?
Mhm.
Do you have the capacity in terms of your resources to get there? You have to look at that. No, very often in the Philippines, we always talk about world class or other things, but we never ask what does it take to get there, and do we have what it takes to get there? No? And that has to be built. That has to be built.
You did say that everything is contextual, so problem solving is contextual. Situating the position of a particular university, you need to understand the context and all that. But Father, these principles that you outlined, do they all apply to all types of schools, whether private or public, whether profitable or resource poor?
Pretty much. For example, I work a lot with public elementary schools through the Ateneo
Mhm.
Center for Educational Development.
Mhm.
And I have seen that the successful, and we have found, for example, when we did a great study of public schools, elementary schools, we did a massive statistical study to determine what it is that uh, differentiates a successful elementary school from a less successful one. And
Mhm.
two variables emerged. One was the leadership of the principal and support of the community. In other words,
I
again,
see.
the capability, private ability and support.
Mhm.
And we have seen that that's correct. That works. In other words, we have found in the work that if we really concentrate on helping the principals and getting the community together, there's a greater chance that the community will move forward. So
And this,
yes,
yes, this applies to public schools, right? I mean,
yes,
so
yes, yes. We work with very poor public schools in Bayatas. No? Big
Mhm.
schools, 5,000 students each,
Mhm.
and quite poor. Bayatas is poor.
What would be the scope for a principal to work in a public school, Father Ben? Where can a principal exercise her leadership?
Well, for example, I'll tell you this a very extraordinary principal that we had, Mr. Ben Kaling. He was in this very, very poor public school, Lupang Pangako, when we contacted him. They had they had they had three shifts actually, 6 to 10, 10 to
Oh
2,
wow.
2 to 6. But he really focused one on protecting class time, making sure that the little time that they had was spent very well. He
Mhm.
made sure that he supported and developed his young faculty. And actually, they were quite successful. For example, when Ateneo worked with him for planning for the future, they were number 94 of 96 of schools in Quezon City. And when he said that, oh, we're going to be in the top 20 in 3 years, they laughed at him. But they were in the top 20 in 2 years, simply by he just focused on the fundamentals. He made sure that class time is class time, no interruptions. He protected class time
Mhm.
and he
Mhm.
supported his young faculty. And that already made a big difference.
Father, I assume that benchmarks are necessary. Do you have a particular set of benchmarks that a school administrator should be paying attention to in the Philippines?
Well, worldwide studies done many years ago about
Mhm.
effective schools had a list of things that differentiate them, and we found them to be correct. One is
Mhm.
protect class time. Uh,
Okay.
not don't class time is class time. Don't interfere with it. You have to give as much time as possible. The second is really to focus on your faculty quality, and then good learning materials. Basically, those three.
Those three. I see. Father, when you returned from Stanford in 1970 with a PhD in mathematics, um, very soon after you came back, you helped form a consortium uh, among Ateneo de Manila, UP, and De La Salle to develop PhD programs in mathematics, physics, and chemistry. Um, how did that come about? What did the work entail? How did you
Well,
do?
first of all, the reason we had to do it is that at that time we had good BS programs in Ateneo, UP, and LaSalle, but we had no graduate programs and we had no research. So
Mhm.
we were very far behind the Western world.
Mhm.
On the other hand, we realized that what we were doing before was sending people abroad. The problem is they did not come back. So we were stuck
Mhm.
with the non-solution.
Mhm.
So that's why we decided to have our own local PhD programs.
Mhm.
But of course, we could not do that on our own. So we really connected with colleagues in Singapore first, then
Mhm.
Japan, especially in Australia, to
Mhm.
help us, to kind of help us. We got advisors, teacher advisors from there. It worked very well. You know,
Yeah.
that program really provided the core of what is now a quite vibrant scientific community in the country. Of course, it had to be extended. We had to go on to what you call engineering and science education project. But that consortium really was what produced what we call the critical mass of
Mhm.
what we now have in terms of the scientific establishment here in the
Mhm.
country. If we had not done that, I think we'd still be stuck. No? We would still be. It was rather innovative because we would do all the coursework here for the first 2 years we'd be here, but then
Okay.
through connection with colleagues abroad, we were able to send people for a year abroad to do their
Okay.
research
Mhm.
and do their thesis and then come back and defend it here.
Father, was it difficult to get it off the ground? I mean, did you have to do a lot of
Yeah,
thinking?
it was difficult to get finances, for
Mhm.
example, support. We need because we wanted them to study full time. Fortunately, we got an early support from actually NEDA, which was supporting then a
Mhm.
PhD statistics in
Mhm.
UP. And they had extra money. At that time, what was DOST, NSDB was not investing. They invested later on. So eventually we began to get support from the UST. But again, that only took care of local expenses. It could not connect with groups abroad. So
Mhm.
we had to really we had to have good links with friends in Singapore, in Australia, and in Japan, so that for example, Japan promotion for science. Uh,
Mhm.
Supported scholars for about 10 years going to Japan so they could do
Mhm.
research there. Similarly with Australia. So
Mhm.
we had to work on all those links, piles and piles of letters connected with all of
Sure.
them.
Did you start out with like a certain number? We want to graduate, I don't know, 10 PhDs in math in 5 years or something, or
Well, we initially started with just taking cohorts of five in
cohorts of
a
five?
year.
Mhm.
Eventually, as our capability grew, we were
Mhm.
able to take more, 10 or more. And now, for example, in UP, they're able to get a lot at any given time because they have more resources. But we're not going to ever get about 4 or 5 a year also.
Is there a continuing need for that consortium, or the need has been
Not
met?
so much anymore because the consortium was important because none of us had the capability to do it our own.
Mhm.
So in that consortium, for example, a student might register to do their mother university might be Ateneo or
Mhm.
UP, but they could take a course in any of the universities and it would be
Mhm.
credited to their PhD program.
I see.
So, you know, you don't have to worry about, we had an agreement where you don't have to worry about number of process registration and so on. The system simply allowed you could take a course in UP and it should be registered in Ateneo and vice versa.
And
So it was a unique arrangement. We needed it
Mhm.
at that time. We don't
Mhm.
need it anymore. No. Each university is capable now of doing it.
How about other universities outside of the top 3 or 4
That's the
universities?
challenge. In fact, I've been telling my colleagues that our problem is that we have not really succeeded in supporting PhD and research programs in the sciences in
Mhm.
universities outside. Essentially, the UP system, Ateneo, LaSalle, and then MSUIIT.
I
We
see.
developed those in the late 70s and the late 80s.
Mhm.
But we don't really have, we have not been able to do that in a wider range of universities, and I've been pressing our younger groups to concentrate on doing that. No? Begin with good BS programs and good MS programs, and
Mhm.
eventually PhD programs in, say, University of San Carlos or in St. Louis University or in Xavier University, and so on.
Mhm. But I mean, overall, the Philippines still needs more graduate degree holders in the sciences.
Yes,
We're not anywhere near.
it's very difficult to do really competitive research because you need numbers for the research, and we just don't have the numbers. You compare with Vietnam, they probably have hundreds of thousands. We just have a few. We have very few, no?
Father, you at around the same time that you helped form the consortium, you also helped form the Mathematical Society of the Philippines, and then also the Southeast Asia Mathematical Society. Was this in tandem with the work of the consortium, or it was
Yes,
different
yes.
thing?
The consortium would not have worked without those. The Mathematical Society of the Philippines allowed us to be organized locally, and it allowed us to get to know one another. But it also gave us an organization so we could lobby with the UST. You know, we're not just individuals. We had an organization that could work out to get funding from the UST, and then it has also allowed us to connect with group colleagues abroad. It allowed us to connect with Singapore. It allowed us to connect with Australia and Japan. So that organization was quite important. It is because of the Mathematical Society of the Philippines that we were able to connect with the Southeast Asian Mathematical Society. And because of the Southeast Asian Mathematical Society, we were able to connect with Japan, Australia, and other groups. They were very important in introducing us to the larger mathematical world and getting support from them.
I'm thinking, for instance, of an innovative teacher listening to you right now, and who has some reform ideas, not necessarily in the same scale as a consortium of the 3 leading universities. What would be the lessons that you learned from that experience of helping lead and found and lead this consortium that might be applicable to this education reformer, regardless of the scale of his reform ambitions?
Well, I think we have written these things up. If you look at them, you can see that these things work because there were groups of people, there were individuals who really made it their mission to make it work, who were quite relentless, shall we say, in pushing, and they were not deterred by obstacles. No? So, for example, myself and several of the mathematicians of that period really kept pushing for these things. And then we were very grateful to have very good friends abroad. Professor Li Pengyi in Singapore, Professor Morimoto in Japan, John Crossley in Australia. We had good friends who also kept pushing with us. These things don't implement themselves. You need individuals who really are passionate to make them work. So that's the main lesson, is that you just have, let's say, if San Carlos or you people or some Jews want to do it, you have to have individuals who are committed to making it work, and of course they have to get support. They have to get support from administration and so on. I used to spend time lobbying with the Office of the President in the Philippines. I would spend time lobbying with different groups because that's the only way to make it work.
Yeah, raising funds and other forms of financial support, very difficult, I guess.
Yeah, you may be surprised that at that time, the NSDB was not focused at all on developing research groups, no? It took time to persuade them to do that.
Father, maybe one last question about the work with the consortium. And I'm asking this question not in a facetious way, but I want to ask, does the Philippine educational system need more Ateneos and LaSalles and UPs? Is that one way of thinking about the future of the educational system, or we have enough Ateneos, LaSalles, and UPs? We need other kinds of schools as well.
Well, the reality is that our greatest need is to improve the basic ed system. No? You could try to create more LaSalle, UP, and Ateneos, but you don't have enough good students to go into them. No? If you the stream of talent that is developed is so small because most 90% of our students go to the public school system, and simply not enough of them would qualify for this program. So at the end of the day, you cannot have an excellent college university system without good and excellent elementary and high school systems. And our problem, so the problem over in the Philippines is we have not paid much attention to the grade school and high school system. And so that's why we really cannot move forward because we just don't have enough talented, well-developed students from the bottom. So I always tell people that we always want to get the fruits of the tree, but we don't want to invest in looking at the trunk and the roots. No? Masyado tayong, we always want quick results.
Okay.
But we have to remember that that PhD student was a baby once, and he went to elementary school once, no? And if the elementary school did not take good care of him, he would not be where he is.
Father, that reminds me, you are helping out again with another government initiative. This is the Second Congressional Commission on Education. You are serving on the Advisory Council for Early Child Care and Development and Basic Education. When I first saw your name there, I wondered why you chose that, not, for instance, tertiary education. Is this the reason why, after 40, 50 years in the educational system, you've zeroed in on the problem, and the problem is basic education?
Yes. In other words, we will never move forward if we don't really take care of the basic education, the fundamentals at that level. I think that should be obvious, but we don't seem to understand it. We don't seem to understand that the ability to offer good programs at the tertiary level depends on the quality of those coming in. And given the situation of elementary and high school students in the country at the moment, we just don't have enough really good graduates because the system is not working well, no? And that's really what differentiates us, say, from Vietnam and China and Japan. They have excellent elementary and high school systems, and that's why they do so well, no?
Father, how does one work successfully? How does one partner successfully with the government? Let's say with DepEd. You're a private education administrator, for instance. What would your advice be?
Well, the first thing I would advise with anybody is spend time getting to know the public school system. Maybe invest in giving time to a particular elementary or high school and really get to know the challenges that they face. No? Because the reality is that we have a big social class problem in the Philippines. The typical person in Ateneo or even UP doesn't really know what's going on in the elementary schools. And so we tend to have solutions that don't work. But more fundamentally, I think if you look at the DepEd itself is so huge and so centralized that we cannot really carry out reform the way DepEd is structured. And that's why we're really pushing in the Edcom, many of us, to decentralize, to give more autonomy with respect to curriculum and implementation and other things to the division level, or at least to the regional level. Preferably, we cannot have one solution in Metro Manila, and in Metro Manila we cannot have one solution in Payatas and the same solution in Ateneo de Manila. We cannot do that. No? Just context and are so different. So the decentralization, and then we really have to come to terms with the language issue. You have to remember that maybe 30 to 40% of our students will never get beyond grade school or will get to high school. And it will not change in our lifetime because the high schools are all in the bayan. So a young person living in the farms will never be able to afford to go to high school because it's too far. In Cabiao, for example, where I work with people, it will cost 200 pesos a day for them to commute to the bayan to go to high school. So you have a group of young Filipinos who will never go beyond first year or second year high school, maybe, but not in high school. And our problem is that our language focus is English because we're assuming that they'll finish high school and go on to college. But we forget the 40% that can never get there. So we have to resolve the language problem. And then, but teaching materials, I don't think we have produced textbooks in the last 6 or 7 years. No? So we're discussing right now, since we are not likely to produce textbooks soon because the system is not functioning, we're discussing how do we provide learning materials in the meantime to the system. Marami mga problema. So very basic. Again, I said time for classes, quality of the teachers, and then learning materials. And the language of instruction. You know, when we look at all our neighbors, they all use their own language. They don't use a foreign language. We're the only country that uses English.
So reconsidering the language, the use of language, deep familiarization with the context,
Yes.
decentralization, those are the things to look out for in working with government agencies. Father, what are your particular hopes for Edcom 2?
We're hoping that Edcom 2 will look at the structural problem. It is really a congressional thing. It's not executive. So what Edcom can really do in an effective way, except for persuading, is to really look at those that are in the legislative system. So it would be great if Edcom could really reform the K-12 law and the DepEd and create a more decentralized DepEd. At the moment, DepEd is so centralized. I don't know if you realize that there are only 3 signing authorities: the secretary, the division superintendent, and the principal. Undersecretaries are staff. And so everything goes to the secretary. But you have 800,000 teachers or 45,000 elementary schools with 7,000 high schools. It's such a huge system. So you have to find a structure that is more decentralized so that you can be more effective. That's one. And then allow more freedom at the local level, at least at the division level, and eventually the school level.
Father, I want to go back to something that you mentioned a while ago about a private education advocate working closely with public schools. And you said one of the things is spend more time with the public school. Do you mean, like, for instance, in conducting, I don't know, a tutorial program, or just, just getting to know how the system works? Did you have anything specific in mind when you said spend more time in public schools?
I don't think we appreciate how different the cultures are of us in the private schools with the public schools. Magkaiba talaga ang kultura. Many people in Ateneo that I know would not be comfortable with the culture of the public school. Parang pagtingin nila medyo Bakiano. So it's a different world. And on the other hand, from the point of view of those in the public schools, this is my real experience. They sometimes think that those of us in the private schools really look down on them. No? So we have to cross that cultural barrier and be comfortable with them and have them comfortable with us. Otherwise, we cannot be effective in talking with them and learning where they are. But if you do that, and I've been at this for the last 40 years, together with Mrs. Horacio, then really it's wonderful. We really learn a lot from each other. But we have to enter their culture. Magkaibang mundo natin. We have to enter their culture. It's a different world.
Would you recommend more programs like Tulong Dunong, private school students taking time to
Tulong Dunong is great. And it has great effect on the students who do that. But ideally also it would really help if the teachers too get involved. No? Kasi the great thing kasi with the Tulong Dunong is they not only tutor the pupils, they visit the homes and get to see the context of these children. And that is really what is very powerful. they begin to see the world in which these children live. And that's why tulong-tulong is so effective. It's not just them giving something to the students, they really are entering into the world. We should do
Father,
that.
yeah. Father, do you think there's enough political will, even if let's assume that Edcom 2 results in some very innovative legislation, for instance, policy recommendations, and so on. Do you think there's political will to implement those changes?
I think the political will that I see right now, that I see that in some of the senators, like Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, I do see that in Congressman Romulo. Right now, I see a lot of political will in Secretary Rex Gatchalian. He's actually pushing very hard and using the SWD money for reading programs. And then I think the political will is also coming from some mayors. It's difficult to get political will from the DepEd because it's just overwhelmed by the problems. No? So what we need from the DepEd, from Vice President Sara Duterte, is the openness to decentralize. And because I also see a lot of political will on the level of division superintendents and on the level of some regional directors. Those are closer to the ground. We really see the problems there. So the initiative for reform cannot come from the top. It's not so much a lack of will, it's just a lack of, the system will not allow it. You would have to get down to those closer to the implementation. The principals, the division superintendents, and the regional directors.
Father Ben, maybe allow me to ask two more questions, having to do with leadership. The first one, related to what you said about initiatives need to be implemented by mayors or governors at that level. About 15 years ago, you popularized the term frontline leadership, and you were looking at more dynamism, more vitality from mayors and governors. How can our educational system help create more dynamic mayors and governors?
Well, that is actually the mission of Synergia Foundation. I was chair of it the first 10 years, and it's continuing now. If you come to know it, you'll see that Synergia over the last 20 years since it was founded, has really created a network of mayors that are really very committed to improving their schools. In fact, but the limit that the mayors have is they cannot interfere with curriculum until curriculum is decentralized. No? And so, but there is a will. Maybe you should attend sometime. We have every year a big education summit, and you can see that. No? So that's been the mission, and we have seen it work.
And then, Father, maybe the last question. Again, reflecting on my upbringing as a student in Ateneo and also in Xavier University, and also looking at the experience of my contemporaries, we were brought up to think of the schools as institutions for leadership. Is that something that private education should fix? I mean, for private institutions to be considered as schools to create leaders, would that be part of the problem or part of the solution?
Well, I think our goal in our schools is to form leaders. What I see, though, as the challenge is that no matter what leadership skills you give them, if they cannot break out of the narrow middle upper class world in which they are and be able to enter into the world of the majority poor, very poor, And it's not just an economic difference, it's a cultural difference. Magkaiba talaga ang kultura.
Mhm.
If you cannot enter into that world, you cannot do very much in the future. You'll end up basically focusing on a very narrow group of people,
Mhm.
and probably proposing solutions for the public schools or health that don't work because you don't know that world. That's really the problem in the Philippines. We don't have a caste system, but we have a social class problem. Middle upper class don't really understand
Mhm.
what the poor are, and vice versa.
Mhm.
And so we don't come out with effective solutions. So really, the challenge is how do you get those of the young leaders that we are forming to really enter that world and get to know it, and then be able to work with these. There are with the ordinary people down the ground. Enter their. You have to enter their world. You cannot change people from above. You have to be with them, and that's the challenge we face.
Thank you very much, Father Bienvenido Nebres of the Society of Jesus. Thank you. This has been an illuminating, inspiring conversation from a lifetime of learning and a life in learning. Thank you again, Father Ben.
Thank you so much, Tumayo. Thank you very much.
That's it for us tonight. As always, the next step for engaged citizens is to take a more active part in rebuilding our democracy. And that includes forming or ourselves becoming more educated or much more active lifelong learners. See you in the public square. This is John Nery. Thank you and good night.